I'm Kate Schaffzin. I'm the Dean of the University of Memphis Cecil Humphreys School of Law. And we are the sole law school in the heart of one of America's great cities. And we commit ourselves at Memphis Law to community engagement and to empowering our diverse community to pursue justice as a moral virtue and a social good. In a city like Memphis, where the majority of citizens are people of color, and our history includes systemic racism and high rates of poverty, issues of justice and policing are always relevant here. I'm proud to serve as the current president of the Center for Excellence in Decision Making, which is a local nonprofit founded in 2018 by prominent Memphis judges, retired Judge Bernice Donald of the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Tommy Parker of the United States District Court for the Western District of Tennessee, Judge Gina Higgins of the Shelby County Circuit Court, and Chancellor Jode Jenkins of Shelby County Chancery Court, together with members of the Memphis Bar Association and the University of Memphis Law School. CEDM's mission is to educate, train, and assist community stakeholders in identifying and addressing factors that inhibit fair and equitable decision-making in the delivery of all services. Every day, we work to fulfill the potential of Memphis and Shelby County by fostering excellence in decision-making among key community leaders, businesses, and individual members of our community. We are dedicated to breaking down barriers within the criminal justice system, providing expanded access to education, and improving fair hiring and promotion practices. Our workshops and training programs provide tangible tools that help eliminate biases and make way for conscious, intentional decision-making. I'm honored to introduce this morning's program from the ABA's Legal Education Police Practices Consortium. This consortium was born out of early conversations among several law deans, myself included, in June 2020, after the murder of George Floyd. As law deans, we knew that we all had some programming and faculty specialists in the area of police reform. But we also recognized that few of us had many resources to offer comprehensive curricula in the area. We wanted to form an organization for sharing resources and opportunities for faculty and students around the country to become educated and involved in this important work. We were thrilled when the ABA invited us to join them and formed this consortium. The consortium contributes to the national effort examining and addressing legal issues in policing and public safety, including conduct, oversight, and the evolving nature of police work. We do this through leveraging the ABA's expertise and that of participating ABA-accredited law schools to collaborate on projects to develop and implement more effective, human rights compliant police practices throughout the United States. We share resources and expand our impact across the country. I'm honored to introduce today's panel to advance that mission. This morning's moderator is Alex Wharton of the Memphis-based Wharton law firm. Alex graduated cum laude from Hampton University in 2004 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aviation Management, and he received his Juris Doctorate degree from the University of North Carolina School of Law in 2007. Alex joined T. Campbell Dennis and Gorham in Raleigh, North Carolina as an associate attorney in 2007, where he concentrated his practice in the areas of workers' compensation and general civil defense. Alex represented hundreds of North Carolina employers, including privately owned and governmental entities, before the North Carolina Industrial Commission and District and Superior Courts. He successfully argued and defended various motions before courts throughout the state of North Carolina. Fortunately for us, Alex returned to Memphis to join his family's law firm in 2010, where he currently concentrates his practice in civil litigation, including personal injury, workers' compensation, premises liability, and municipal law, in addition to criminal defense. Please welcome our moderator, Attorney Alex Wharton.
Good morning. Well, I know it's raining, but good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Dean Schaffzin, for the introduction. Thank you for having me to the criminal justice section of the ABA. Welcome to Memphis. As Dean Schaffzin said, whoever brought the terrible weather with you today should be punished appropriately. Yesterday was a beautiful day, and now will pass pretty soon. Fortunately, I am not going to speak too long today because I'm simply exercising my privilege as a moderator to advance the conversation, to hear from very qualified individuals who will speak to us about the policing system in Memphis, but also in the wake of the death of Tyre Nichols on January 7, 2023. How do we get to that point, and how can we ensure that our city, better yet our state and our nation, never have to see anything like that again? With us today, we have 5 esteemed individuals. We have the Reverend Earl Fisher, who is the senior pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church and the founder of Up the Vote, #1 here in Memphis, Tennessee. We have Mark Bereskia, the director of the Institute for Public Service Reporting here in Memphis, Tennessee. Ms. Tequila Rucker, with Justice and Safety for All. Amber Sherman, Black Lives Matter Memphis, and also Decarcerate Memphis. And finally, the Reverend Ayanna Watkins, lead organizer and executive director for MICA, which is based here in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to give them the opportunity to speak briefly to you about what their missions are, but also in the context and framework of Tyre Nichols and policing accountability as a whole, what their work looked like before January 7, 2023, before Tyre Nichols' death, and how that work has been impacted since his tragic passing at the hands of Memphis Police Department officials. So let me start with Reverend Fisher, if you would. Reverend Fisher, tell us about your work in this area of police accountability and how we got to this point and what your organization is trying to do to make sure that this does not happen again.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you, my dear brother Alex, and to my wonderful colleagues and compadres, and even the church member. I'll let y'all guess which one is which. Also, because Brother Alex didn't say everybody has to press this special button before you get ready to talk. It's like we're at the U.S. Congress or something, right? I am primarily a pastor. I know I'm involved in a lot in the community, but I enter that work from the platform of what I believe to be a deep vocation and calling, which is to allow God's justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, but also because I believe God's will should be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I don't believe that it is God's will that our people are brutalized, that our people are over-policed, that our people are ultimately killed because of unjust and inequitable systems and structures. And so outside of what I might preach about and talk about from the pulpit platform at Abyssinian, I also believe it's vital that we engage in social justice efforts and initiatives to create a more just society through more just policies. I think we are where we are because for the last several years, people in positions of power and authority have not listened to people like those represented at this table. I think a lot of what we've seen amplified on a national scale because of some of the most high-profile injustices are a byproduct of people not being willing to deeply engage in the necessary dialogue and discussion about what has happened, what is happening, and what should happen. So I'll yield the floor to the rest of my wonderful and esteemed panelists, but I will ultimately say that I'm glad that we're here today to advance this conversation. But at some point, our conversations have to stop being circular. If I could document the number of times I've been asked by local or national media to commentate on whether it was Tyre Nichols or George Floyd or Darius Stewart or Jonathan Bradshaw or Martavius Banks, or take your pick, I would say, I wish I had a nickel for every time I had to say the same thing over and over again. And so, hopefully, we can actually start to get people who don't just endorse some of what you'll hear today, but actually enforce it. And hopefully for those of you who are in this arena of law and legal exercise, hopefully that you could help us advance some of what we've been saying in some ways that could be more productive. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to the direction of the conversation.
Thank you, Reverend Fisher. Mark Pereskier from the Institute of Public Service reporting. Tell us about your work and how you get to this point.
Thank you, everyone. I am the director of the Institute of Public Service Reporting at the University of Memphis. Before that, in previous life, I worked for nearly 30 years at the Commercial Appeal, which was the main newspaper here. I guess it still is in a way. I've been writing about police and police misconduct off and on for probably 30 years. A lot of the earlier years was invested in investigating corruption within the department in all kinds of manner. In more recent years, especially since George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, been hyper-focused on police misconduct as it relates to excessive force. And that is a persistent, long-running problem here, as it is in many cities. My small staff, we have a very small staff, by the way. We only have 3 journalists, and so everything we do, we have to be, our time is very precious, and so we've invested a lot of resources with a lot of political pushback to what we're doing, but it's a very important endeavor. After George Floyd was murdered, looked at 5 years of internal reports at MPD to see how they investigated excessive force, and probably the most significant finding was that we found repeated incidents of what I would call torture, where individuals were put in handcuffs and were either beaten or pepper sprayed in the face or electroshocked with a taser. And universally, all of these cases were treated as disciplinary matters. There was never the thought that this might be a crime. If you or I did that to somebody, put them in handcuffs and did something like that, we would be charged with probably with multiple felonies. The result of that reporting was the DA had created a special team to review all of these findings of excessive force and review them and put prosecutors' eyes on them to see the crimes that have been committed. And a couple of officers were actually indicted as a result of that. So, segueing very quickly, I don't want to monopolize the time here, but after Tyre Nichols was killed, I guess I'm going to brag a little bit, but our organization, we were the first to tie the 5 officers to the special unit Scorpion, which had a very low profile at the time. I mean, it had received some news attention prior to that. It was all in kind of PR rosy terms about the great things that the police department was doing to crack down on crime. But we were able to, through searching a number of court affidavits, identify them as being part of that unit, and then also looking at what they were doing. And this was the real eye-opening part of this. And a lot of other news organizations have built on this since then. There was a big story in the New York Times that in, I think, early February that came out a couple weeks after ours. But basically, there were patterns of officers driving in unmarked cars, pursuing individuals. Basically, it was like a gauntlet where, and it's targeted to certain neighborhoods, largely minority neighborhoods, where anything that falls within their field of vision that person became a suspect, whether they were on the street as a pedestrian or in a car. They would be looking for things like not having proper licensing, broken tail light, tinted windows, and they would pull these individuals over and subject them to invasive searches. And a lot of times, whether it's consensual or not, there's a lot of pressure. There were a lot of very volatile, and this is all in the 9 months before Tyre Nichols was killed, a lot of very volatile interactions among these officers and the people that they were chasing. They would do something that they call mobile surveillance, where they would get an unmarked car up on the bumper of somebody that they were interested in, and they'd have a whole convoy of cars, and they would be pursuing this car, and they would kind of push them into speeding. And the reports would say, like, he was clocked doing pacing. They would use the term pacing, 80 miles an hour through a 40-mile-an-hour zone, a residential neighborhood. A lot of times they would, and the individuals bailing out of the car and, running across multiple lanes of freeway, very dangerous situations. You really got the picture that what happened with Tyre Nichols was not an isolated incident. This was part of the culture. And so that is something that we're still dealing with. The city council has passed some ordinance to deal with that. But so that's kind of what the foundation of what our work has been in recent months. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you. Tequila, tell us a little bit about, and based upon what Mark just discussed in the way what their investigations found, what your organization and what you do individually to address those issues. And I'll just throw this question out for you to add. Are you surprised by what Mark and his folks found in the way of that unit and MPD's tolerance of some of those activities?
Tequila Rucker with the Justice and Safety Alliance, and just to highlight, we are a coalition of various organizations that are working collectively to shift the narrative of what safety will look like in our community. So we were not surprised, quite disappointed that this is a culture that continues to show its face. We know that systemically racism continues to exist because we have not been bold enough to have the courageous conversations necessary to address these things that continue to happen. And so just the lack of accountability for law enforcement, it perpetuates that activity and behavior that we've seen taking place, and that resulted in the death of Tyre Nichols. Overall, we continue to punish and over-police instead of doing preventive measures and placing funding in systems that we know that can shift the direction of how we operate as a community, such as in education, in our transit and housing systems. And so we got here because we've turned a blind eye to several things that are happening in our face because they do not directly impact us as a whole. And I'm glad we're here to have this conversation today.
Thank you, Ms. Rucker. Amber Sherman from Black Lives Matter Memphis. Everyone knows Black Lives Matter.
Official Black Lives Matter.
Official Black Lives Matter Memphis. Thank you for that correction, Amber. But tell us about the work that you do, official chapter of Black Lives Matter Memphis does in the realm of police accountability, but also just general society issues to make the quality of Black Memphians and their lives better.
Gotcha. So before the murder of Tyre Nichols, I was working on in-money bail work with Official Black Lives Matter Memphis. We essentially have been working on that for several years now, pushing the issue of highlighting how the average person is staying in Tulapapa for 5 to 7 years. This is someone who hasn't been convicted of a crime. This is a pretrial detention center, and the type of living spaces they were in, and that essentially ended in us suing the county. So now they have new bail practices. But with Decarcerate Memphis, just this past December, we had done research over about 2 years analyzing citations and traffic tickets that people were receiving to show the disparities within pretextual traffic stops, which I forgot his name, but the guy on Tequila's other side talked about
Mark, sure.
There you go. Mark talked about how pretextual traffic stops are used by the Scorpion Unit. So we specifically had a meeting with the city council, did a presentation showing that on average, Black women were being pulled over almost 5 times more than white women, and Black men were being pulled over 4 times more than white men. So they knew that there was a problem. And I think specifically when it comes to the city of Memphis and other places that use these pretextual stops, they know that it's an issue. They're unwilling to release the chokehold they have on white supremacy to look at non-carceral options that they know will make the livelihoods of Memphians better. Because if they do that, then that removes the power that the elite business class here in the city has. And if we empower citizens to do better, then of course we're losing power and we don't want that. So I think they've known it's an issue this entire time. We've been using these jump and grab task force for over 50 years. When Jack Owens was sheriff here, who actually killed himself because of an incident that happened with a man who was also 29 years old, who was beat to death by a task force almost 35 years ago. They were using those same exact task force. So they've known it's an issue, they know that it's wrong, they're purposely doing it, and it has to move past accountability and the action that we're gonna take, and that started with those ordinances that we had passed.
Thank you, Amber. Reverend Ayanna Watkins, lead organizer and executive director for Micah, and just in case, I know obviously we don't have everyone who is here from Memphis. We have some guests and also people from Memphis who may not know what that means, but Micah stands for Memphis Interfaith Coalition for Action and Hope. Reverend Watkins, tell us about your organization, its work pre-January 7th, 2023 with the murder of Tyre Nichols and how we get to this point, and if your organization same kind of trail of thinking that something or knowing that something was wrong in terms of how we were doing policing here locally.
Absolutely, thank you for having me, thank you for this Congress microphone. Reverend Deanna Watkins, I'm the executive director for MICA, just promoted an organizer to lead organizer, so I'm gonna steal your thunder. But very excited to be here because this conversation is really important. And excited to be on this panel with all of these glorious folks that we've been doing work side by side, especially for these last several months, but in other ways as well in the preceding months. So to your point, MICA is an organization of organizations, and we equip people of faith and goodwill to organize communities for systemic change through collective action. It's ironic that the point you just made, Amber, about being already in front of City Council, that was December, and I remember because we were there that same day. Both of us trying to address things in policing. MICA was there to try and get mental health crisis response out of policing. And we were so intrigued by the presentation of Decarcerated in that day that it started another link up and connection that continues to this day to try and also just pull out of, if we must have policing, which is its own argument, if we must, then we need to get out of policing things that can be done in other ways by better professionals. Traffic is one of them. And beyond this work, even before January 7th, we were working on some of the things that you heard Tequila address: economic equity, educational equity, race and class equity in the justice system. I can't help but think sometimes, what if we had a viable transportation system that could have gotten Tyre to all the places he was going that day, all of which are well traveled in this city, to go from FedEx to Shelby Farm, and back to a major intersection and Rains and Ross. What if he had just been able to take the bus? He'd still be here with us today. Maybe we'd be going to his art show. And so I think about that stays with us, and the dignity of every human being, to Errol's point, is what keeps us in this work every day.
Thank you for being with us today, Reverend Watkins. Reverend Fisher, something jogged your mind when Reverend Watkins was speaking about that December 2022 meeting before the City Council.
Yeah, I recall several conversations that we've had with our elected officials and appointed officials over the years. And the fundamental baseline of where I think the conflict lies is in the philosophical approach to public safety. That most of our elected officials, and most of whom have been appointed by them, have bought into the notion, I wouldn't call it an erroneous notion if y'all want to talk about it after we can, but I think all of the data has disproven this. The idea that the way to get to public safety is with more police. And so that's what we keep coming ahead. I've been in conversations with the former police director, in front of City Council, having conversations about this. We've challenged the previous district attorney on these notions. And so a lot of the policies and a lot of the practices, a lot of the patterns that we've encountered have been grounded in this idea that police are the solution. And especially over the last few years, a conversation about complementing how many police officers need to be on the beat. And so there's a couple of data points, I'm sure Mark can attest to these, that have stuck out for me for the last several years. Number one, Memphis has about 650,000 people, about 450,000 of those are black. At its height, there have been about 50,000 violent crimes. That's all together, every type of violent crime. And I'm exaggerating, it hasn't even been 50,000, but let's just say that there was. And we also know that most of the time, violent crimes are committed by one person commits more than one violent crime. So of the 50,000, it's less than 1% of the population that is engaged in that. But let's just say all 50,000 were committed by one person. That's still less than 5% of the population. But the policies that are produced tend to impact the 95% a lot more aggressively than even the 5%. But the idea is, this is the solution. What you have to do is mass incarcerate. It's not about, as Tequila was talking about, social services or political empowerment. It's not that. It has to be, you got to get more police, especially in some of the most underprivileged and disinvested neighborhoods. And so that's the fundamental clash. It's the ideological clash. And one of the reasons we are in where we are right now is because those of us at this table and beyond decided to also do some political empowerment. and some political engagement. Because I will say this, and not just because he's here, I've said this in a lot of different places. If we had the previous district attorney still in office, when Tyre Nichols was killed, Memphis would have been in flames. And the reason that it's not is because enough people were politically engaged and involved and saw the philosophical differences and said, somebody else needs to be in office that has a different perspective on this. So other things that come to mind, that the majority of the time the police are on the beat, they're not dealing with violent crime. About 90% of their job is dealing with something other than violent crime. And lastly, another way that this is just erroneous, the argument that, increasing police officers equates to violent crime, I often say, Nashville has a larger population. Nashville has larger land mass. Nashville has a smaller police force, and Nashville has lower crime. But many of our elected officials really don't seem to care about any of those data points. When they talk, they are saying the baseline of approaching public safety is increasing police officers. And I think that's why we're here.
And we're going to get back to that's a very good point, Reverend Fisher. And let me just take this moment to recognize two individuals who play three individuals who play a very important role within the legal system, justice system within our county that we have here today. First of all, Reverend Fisher spoke to the current district attorney, Steve Morrow, who is in attendance with us today. Thank you, Dean Morrow, for being here. We have Chief Phyllis Aluko, Chief of the Shelby County Public Defender's Office. I think I saw her here as well. And then lastly, we have Reagan Frondren, the first Assistant United States Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee, who is in attendance. So it means something. I'm going to get back to that point because that raises a totally different line of question, but I do want to ask you, Mark, you gave us a little bit of a hint into some of the things that your folks, the small staff, just doing some ground beat work investigation in the wake of Tyre Nichols' killing, were able to find, and you look backwards. What stands out to you as being one of the most shocking things that happened in the wake or in the months leading up to Mr. Nichols' death that MPD or someone higher up should have known and just kind of turned a blind eye to? What stands out?
I don't know if that's necessarily shocking, but one thing that stands out is that, people associated this kind of proactive, zero tolerance, aggressive, abusive policing with Scorpion, but it really is something that has been going on years. Scorpion was only formed, it was the fall of 2021, I think. It's something that's been going on for decades. I've been out interviewing people and, officers driving in unmarked cars and patrolling neighborhoods without, lights or sirens, and then, targeting individuals because they fall into their field of vision. This is something that goes on a lot, and it's been going on for decades. It's, Scorpion was actually a subunit of the organized crime unit, which is a big operation here. It's, started out as their police squad decades ago, and it's a big enterprise where they pull in a lot of revenue for the city by stopping people and making, confiscating guns and drugs. The whole philosophy of this type of policing is that they're going to prevent crime before it happens by intercepting guns and drugs. When you really look at it, would be interesting to do a complete in-depth study, but a lot of what we looked at, they're going after a lot of really low-hanging fruit. The name organized crime kind of implies that they're going after drug lords and international drug cartels and whatnot, but when you look at who they're arresting, they're arresting average people, and who are being stopped for minimal offenses. And a lot of times they're working hard to say that this was a felony because somebody had a gun in their car and they resisted arrest. It's the predicate crime, but it's like there's a lot in this. This runs deep and it needs to be explored. We've only started on the tip of the iceberg, and we've got a lot more work to do. I wish we had a bigger staff. But I'm not just talking about me, but the media in general. This is something that really needs to be explored and fleshed out, and hopefully will. But I think that's probably the most interesting or shocking element, is that this is this has been a way of life for, a way of doing business for the Memphis Police Department, and I think police departments all over the country too.
Thank you, Mark. I neglected, now I'm going to get your input on that, tequila as well. I neglected to mention a very important individual who's also in attendance with us today. He actually sent me a text message and insulted me, but I do want to recognize him. First Assistant Federal Defender Tyre is here with the federal disappointed brothers. He's a member of a different fraternity that was founded, I think it was November, sometime in 1911, but he gets real sensitive when I don't recognize that he's present. So, but he is here, so thank you, Tyrone, for being here. Tequila, to that point, and to Reverend Fisher's sound theory about how do we look at policing, the number, the complement, all those things, the terms that you use citywide and countywide. How do you balance, in your opinion, the need for policing against civil rights, liberties, dignity in certain neighborhoods that Amber and Reverend Watkins talked about? How do you balance the need to have a police system and do it effectively in light of what we hear from a media perspective and know here locally of carjackings, thefts, breaking into cars, things of that sort? Where's the balance there? I know you're not running for office, so this is not going to be held against you, but find the fine line between those two if you can.
Sorry, I forgot to push the button. So I think we find the balance in educating individuals, the public, the community on what safety could look like. We've been programmed to believe that police are to serve and protect us, and so we have no other alternatives or individual that we can reach out to if I have a situation in my home other than calling the police. Well, that distrust has further been bridged between the community, and what we have to make sure we're doing is having those conversations and put community-centered solutions at the front. We can balance those liberties by continuing to uplift the work that we're doing and going out and passing policies that will shift the narrative while we continue to talk to individuals one-on-one, boots on the ground, and involving people to get involved.
Thank you. Reverend Watkins, you mentioned something a little bit earlier about the need for a police system and that possibly being a conversation of its own, but we're talking about police accountability as a whole society approach. So not necessarily just holding officers who violate the law accountable, but organizationally. How do you do that? What would you like to see in the way of Memphis Police Department or police departments across the country who have to deal with the need to target individuals who are repeat offenders or whatever the case may be, whatever term is used, but also in the same vein not make targets out of neighborhoods or people of certain views or colors and income levels for that matter? That's it. Thank you.
The microphone. Thank you for that question. It takes me back to what Tequila was just saying, and I lost my train of thought. I'm back. Okay. Thank you. So, what I think that we need, one of the things we can do is get out of accepting these pat answers and false equations that equate arrests with justice. That's one of the things they did with the Scorpion Union, right? When they were lifting it up and celebrating what it did, we made 200 arrests, we made 600 arrests, right? Again, if only a small percentage of our population is actually out there doing and engaging in criminal activity, who else was arrested? You, your neighbors, people down the street. Same thing, it was the same argument we made during the district attorney's race. When are we going to get out of the habit of making number of convictions equivalent to justice? It's not the case. And so there's a culture change that needs to take place in our society parallel to the culture change that many of us have already acknowledged needs to take place inside of policing. Oh, she slipped out. Professor Demetria Frankel's here, and together with Dr. Dwayne Lewis, the two of them wrote an amazing piece on policing, the history of policing, and its population. That shift, we have not shifted from trying to control the black and brown population with policing. And when we can admit that and start to think differently, as Q was saying about what safety could look like for all of us, right now, we know that when so many of our black and brown communities see a police car or realize they're being pulled over by police, though the car isn't marked and the person getting out is not in uniform, their feeling is not additional safety. It's fear, perhaps even terror. And this lasts, it's in our bodies. Alice probably knows this, I am married to a Morehouse man, which means I have been sucked into the Morehouse community. But so many of them, they're 40 and 50 years old now, still hold in their bodies memories of that Red Dog unit from Atlanta. They remember what it was like to operate in Atlanta, knowing that that unit was out there, not being criminals, not engaged in that activity, but they knew whenever they had to go anywhere, anybody could jump out of an unmarked car at any time and get them for their black skin and male bodies. This is the terror we have introduced and maintained in Memphis. Like you said, like Mark said, not just through the Scorpion unit. We've called it all kinds of things through the years. But we still hold that fear and terror in our bodies. And fearful people don't always make the best decisions. Sometimes they run from the police and then we blame them for running, though it is the human thing to do. And so I think we have to get out of that culture of feeling like the only way that we can have peace in our communities is to oppress and suppress an entire body of people in Memphis. There is another way.
Thank you, Reverend. Amber, you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, this is why abolition is so important. When we talk about abolishing the practices of policing and how they're created, it starts with not using these task force units. It starts with not using these specialized units. We know that they aren't working. We know that they're not in high crime areas. The police chief herself has admitted that she doesn't know why they were there, and that area is not a high crime area. It's the area I grew up in. I'm from Hoover Hill. You know, I've lived there my whole life. It's never been a high crime area. They had one homicide in the entire year, 2022, in that half-mile radius where Tyre Nichols stopped. So we know specifically that this is to target black people, especially young black people, and it's purposeful. And so when are we gonna say, okay, we're gonna stop doing that and put in better practices like giving them somewhere they can go and do recreational activities that's not next to a police station, or giving them clean parks and places to play that's not only in Midtown that you can actually get adequate transportation to, instead of creating new programs to stop them from being dressed inappropriately and playing loud music, which also are not illegal things. So when I think about what Ayana was saying and how we don't have these approaches to public safety that are realistic, it's because it's set up that way. And so also, I mean, the call to action to you all is when you're practicing law, like what are you gonna do to hold these same people accountable? To point out the fact that you know that this was not illegal, and then what does it look like to hold them accountable past that to stop using those practices?
Thank you, Amber, and I'm glad that you issued somewhat of a call to action to us as practitioners, even if you're not an attorney within the room. Obviously, if you are definitely within the arena. On one side or the other, we have some members of the Shelby County DA's office here, as well as members of the Shelby County Public Defender's Office. So I appreciate you always trying to light the fire. Reverend Watkins mentioned, and I think you may have mentioned as well, Amber, how we stop people, the policies that surround stops, traffic stops, and I know Mark spoke to that as well about OCU units conducting traffic violation stops primarily. And just for informational purposes, the next few questions are going to stem from some current things that have taken place within the city of Memphis in the past 2 weeks, one of them actually in the past 2 or 3 days in terms of proposals. But I want to talk about, and I'm going to toss this to you first, Amber, the Achieving Driving Equality Ordinance that was passed just this past week, if I'm not mistaken, or in the last 10 days. And I'll just set that up just for those who don't know. It was an ordinance that was passed that will allow police officers to stop drivers for what are deemed primary violations, and when they are both a primary and secondary violation. However, they may not stop a driver for only a secondary violation. So secondary violations include vehicles with expired registration within 60 days of expiration, when a temporary registration permit is improperly located but still clearly displayed, The registration plate is not securely flashing, but it's clearly displayed. A single light, whether it be a brake or a headlight, or running light is out, or loosely secure bumpers. Now, we have a lot of those running around Memphis, loosely secure bumpers. That's a phenomenon in and of itself. But tell us a little bit about the Achieving Driving Equality Act and how you think its passage positively impacts policing within our city.
Yeah, so I would just say that there were other ordinances that were passed that I also think are important. So I think they're all encompassing, make it safer for Memphians to be to have any kind of interactions with police. So one being that no longer the use of unmarked cars in traffic enforcement, so they can no longer pull someone over in an unmarked car. Because as Ayana was saying, the terror is immediate when someone is in an unmarked car and pulls me over. At least if you have like lights in a regular car, I know you're a police officer. And then also passing the data transparency ordinance, which would require that they have to report on any time they're stopping someone, whether in a car, they're pedestrian, whatever mode of transportation they're using, they have to report that, because the way that the data was being reported previously was that they only had data if there was an actual ticket given, right? And so we know that these specialized units will pull someone over and beat them or steal something from them or impound their car, but they don't give them a ticket. And so then there's no way for us to hold them accountable of pulling that person over, and they have to report if any use of force was used, what the use of force was, why they were being pulled over, because as Tyre was asking himself, what did I do? Right? So many times people ask, what did I do? They don't give them an answer, and then they make up something for an affidavit after they've searched their car and maybe found like a gram of weed or something. So I think those are also important because that covers the accountability piece as well, and then also removing police from having interactions with citizens because they're abusing their power. It's very clear that they're abusing the power of being able to stop folks, knowing that poor people might not have their registration intact. We got a county clerk's office that also is trash, so I might not have it. My bumper might be falling off of my car, but that's not a crime. So criminalizing folks for financial requirements is one, inhumane, but two, purposeful, because that's how we put black folks in jail, right? I know that person is poor, so most likely if I pull them over, I can accuse them of doing something and I can put them in jail and I know they can't get out. So then that makes the county more money because they're making money off that person being in pretrial detention. It's a continuous system. So being able to disrupt that system is what's most important to us, and also removing the amount of contact that folks have with police, which I also think is a win for police because they talk about how much they fear for their lives. Well, if you don't have to come in contact with me, there's nothing for you to fear.
Thank you. And you bring up a good point about the traffic violations. It brought something to mind. I was stopped in September for the same thing, dealing with tags that had not come back from the county clerk's office. And the police officer explained to me, she was able to do this, but she still stopped me. She was able to trace, even though my license plate, when we changed from the green and white to the blue, she was still able to look at my license plate, look at the VIN number, and then associate that with a registration that had already been processed, but I just didn't have my tags. So that 5 to 10 minute stop of me or detour of me could have ended totally different for either one of us, depending upon how she reacted or how I reacted. For what you and what the city council have agreed, and it is a secondary violation of something that clearly is known. Everyone knows what happens with our registration and our tags, how long it takes to get those. So I'm glad you brought that up. Reverend Fisher, something that Amber said piqued your interest.
Per usual, right? None but love with my dear sister Amber. She's talking about and exemplifying and articulating how deep the structural inequities are. So if we talk about not just the tags, but the bumpers that keep coming up. Have you rolled down the streets of Memphis? I mean, if you ran into some of those potholes, your bumper would be messed up too, right? But then that's part of the larger structure and system. If it is literally in the street, in the ground, and it damages your mode of transportation, and you are not able to afford the repair, now you are spotlighted and highlighted on the traffic beat by police officers, as they talked about, who said that they fear for their lives. Why? Because they have been trained to presume that it is likely that they'll encounter someone that they pull over that will somehow assault them, despite the fact that the numbers say assaults on police officers on traffic stops, what, 1 in every 7,000? But that's not the way that they're trained. They're trained as if every encounter when they pull someone over might lead to their death, even though I think the last modest count, 1 in every 6.5 million traffic stops, and it might be higher now, so what, 1 in every 5 million traffic stops. And so the structural nature of this is where we tend to get moved or maneuvered away from because of people's allegiance to the erroneous philosophy that I mentioned earlier. And here's what is not the answer, and I appreciate Mark writing about this. The answer is not musical chairs. It's not taking officers out of one unit and putting them in another. It's not taking some of the top brass who didn't retire and reassigning them. But that is what we've been fed, and with every passing day, we seem to be recoiling back to the status quo that got us here, which puts me back to where we started in this conversation. We have to keep saying the same thing. It's rinse and repeat, because the allegiance to the erroneous philosophy is so ingrained in our psyche, it's so deeply embedded in our system, in our structures, that no matter how phenomenal your legalese might be, no matter how good your rhetorical wizardry might be, if we don't address the system and the structure at its core, all we're doing is finding another name to call the same form of injustice. So I hope we push more on the system, the systemic and the structural, and not just the symbolic, not just the cosmetic. But that seems to be the things that we've been offering. Lastly, I'll say, I sincerely and significantly appreciate the ordinances that were passed, but I would reemphasize this. It is one thing for them to be endorsed. It is another thing for them to be enforced. If you listen to law enforcement, they will tell you from the city on down that they embraced the 8 can't wait. They endorsed it. That was the policy. And if they enforce the policy, explain how we end up with Tyre Nichols. So I'm concerned that although these things have been passed because of much aggressive activism on the ground, that even though it's been passed, unless you change the system and the structure, the culture will find a way to eat the policy for lunch, no matter how just the policy might be.
Very good point. Reverend Fisher, and then I'll ask you, I'm going to ask Tequila a question, and I'll follow up with you, Mark. Tequila, how long do you think that will take for the cultural change within MPD, even if we pass 10,000 ordinances? What is it going to take? And how long will that take for them to buy in? Because they ultimately are the police. And until they buy in, we're still dealing with the same thing as Reverend Fisher mentioned, rinse and repeat, calling different ordinances different things.
I can't specify how long it will take, but I know it's not an overnight fix. I know the work that we're doing now is beginning to shift the narrative, and as well as the mindsets of everyone that deals with the culture and climate on a consistent basis. And so, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but it's my hope that as we continue to show up and educate individuals, have these conversations, allow to disrupt the status quo and not be held liable or accountable or censored just because you have a different view of opinion, then that's how we make the progress that we need to make. Just inviting daily citizens in to get involved and understand, like, yes, we were taught this way, we were programmed to believe that this way was the only way, but now we have alternatives, and it's time for us to show up and hold those individuals accountable. It's not an overnight fix, but I think we're moving in the right direction, and so that's what we are.
Thank you, Tequila. Go ahead.
Just one quick thing. They fix things overnight when they want to. Those ordinances were set to go into effect immediately, and when we see an issue that that affects white people, we fix it immediately. But when it comes to the black citizens, we found other ways to go around it, like creating a juvenile abatement program, because now that we can't stop with contextual stops, let's reinforce vagrancy laws and stop and frisk. So I do want to just point out, I don't think that it takes time. When folks want to fix something, they do it immediately, all the time. It just depends on who it's for.
Thank you. Mark, in the 3 months since Mr. Nichols' passing, and then the expose that you did, I think towards the end of January, shortly before the charges were levied against the 5 officers, and then the administrative actions taken against other city and county officials, what has been the relationship and response by MPD and its top brass to journalists like you trying to do some investigating, reporting, but also getting their responses to ordinances that are being proposed and different policies being proposed and considered by city government officials?
It's a very excellent question. It's something that I talk about a fair amount about the relationship with MPD. One of my lines that I use these days is that trying to cover the Memphis Police Department is the equivalent of trying to cover the Kremlin during the Cold War, because they are impenetrable. They built this bunker around them. For a long time, I thought it was just me. But you know, as I talk to other journalists, it's not the case. I mean, I get the idea that they perhaps see my reporting as at times hypercritical, and maybe I'm not a friend of the department. Over the years, I've had a lot of interaction with officers there, but it's everyone, and it's kind of a mentality, and I understand it to a point. They feel that they're beleaguered and besieged, but they're not doing themselves or the community any favors when they're getting emails from reporters asking about serious issues, and a lot of times, I don't know, 7 out of 10, you will get no response at all. They just pretend like you didn't even ask the question. Sometimes if you're asking about something that's in litigation, they've got a handy excuse, but that because it's in litigation, they can't talk about it. But it's been very difficult to get information out of the police, and that's part of this deep culture, and it's changed over time too. In the 30 years that I've been writing about MPD, reporters used to have a lot more access to police. They could go into the bureaus, they could go out to the crime scenes, they could go and talk to the captains and whatnot, and for just a whole confluence of reasons that's changed. And I think that, I don't know, we need to figure out a way going forward how to resolve that, because the police have to become part of this conversation in order for us to help change the system that needs to be changed. I could say one other thing about to follow up on what Pastor Earl was talking about kind of the resistance to change. Is there is a deep, just in my reporting in recent years, a deep cultural resistance to change. And one of the things, when I was looking at the excessive force, internal excessive force investigations, MPD does say that they have banned chokeholds, but when you really start looking at it, and I did an analysis of this a couple of years ago, 1 in every 3 of their findings of excessive force was overturned by a commanding officer. Well, what happens is when an officer is charged with misconduct, excessive force, they file administrative charges, what they call a statement of charges, and it's a violation, reciting various violations of policy, and then they go to a hearing, and at this hearing, a commander of the chain will adjudicate this and decide what, after the internal affairs has already said they violated X, Y, and Z, he'll act kind of like the judge and jury, and 1 out of 3 of these people reversed, and sometimes in very bizarre ways. Like I wrote about this case where there was a police officer who was at a crime scene and was talking to a 16-year-old girl, and he didn't like what she said, and she wasn't a part of any crime or anything. He got behind her and picked her up by the neck and carried her across the street and threw her to a patrol car. The internal affairs said that was a chokehold and that he should be disciplined for that. But the commanding officer said that's not a chokehold. That it got down to this arcane kind of esoteric discussion. But he was taught at the police academy that a chokehold is when you put your arm flat across the esophagus and cut off the air, versus what this guy did is he had a V pattern around her neck and was cutting off the blood flow around. But it's kind of like talking about how many angels dance on the head of a pin. That's another issue there, that it is something that requires intense vigilance and transparency that we don't have. We need to get into these, we need more transparency and be able to get into these hearings and get access to these records. Getting records from the police department can take months and years. I have one request now that's about, I filed it December 26, 2020, so it's been almost 2.5 years and I still don't have a response on it. So it's a tough nut to crack, but it's something that requires a lot of vigilance.
Thank you. Reverend Watkins, go ahead.
Just to speak to that, I think there's a tie there into the culture in policing that needs to be addressed and brought into the light. blue code that we keep talking about, and we've given, in our society, we've given police the right to keep that secrecy and that culture of, I don't have to tell or be accountable for the things that I've done and the things that have happened here. What happens here stays here. And I'm a social worker by training as well as a minister, and that's the culture of domestic violence. That's the culture that keeps abuse in perpetuity. And so I just want to speak to that, like, when we call for data transparency, that's really a culture shift. People thought about it as a light lift. I'm just asking for the data. But what it really does is push back against that police culture that you don't have the right to know what I know. And when that happens, we can continue to operate. They can continue to operate as they have been operating. One of the things that Michael worked on in 2019 was getting the police procedures and policies out in the open. They're on the website now. That's one little step. We have to keep making those steps to make sure that the people can hold the police accountable.
This question is to you, through you, Tequila with JSA, Justice Safety Alliance, Amber with official Memphis, Black Lives Matter Memphis, as well as Micah. Has there been any interest from MPD or willingness to educate the public collectively with your organizations or individually for that matter to talk about rights, to build, help rebuild that trust and begin to push back against that cultural phase or that cultural mindset that you mentioned, Reverend Watkins? Has there been any attempt by MPD to do that?
I was almost with you till you said about MPD. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Micah has some plans in place and to work with JSA, as well as I know Decarcerate is working on plans as well to help people know their rights now.
Right.
Now that the ordinances have come to pass, and either of them can talk a little bit more about that. But I have not seen such things at all. In fact, we really had to pull teeth to get them to come to a panel or a workshop or a town hall or anywhere where they could sort of share some of the things that are going on internally. One of the campaigns we have happening now is Countdown to Change, where Mike is calling law enforcement and city government every day to see what has changed systemically in the culture of law enforcement that we can share and report. And the plan is to do that until January 7, 2024. And so we want to make sure that the people have venues to get this information. And if we don't see it from MPD, then we'll figure it out ourselves.
And I asked it, and I'm going to chime in. I asked it because of MPD, if they are a player in this, if they are a part of the culture, one would think or assume that it would be reasonable for a representative, even if it's from a ward, precinct commander, or shift commander, or someone like that, to be present at the meeting to talk about the policy so that it's not adversarial. It's not like you're coming up with a game plan of how to beat the other team. It's informative. It's strictly information that the police need to hear to be reinforced. So that's why I asked, and I threw MPD's name into that.
Well, I'll say, as a response to that, that over time, because when we started this work, Director Rollins was in place. What I found is when a police director sees the writing on the wall and that they are at the end of their term, you can get a lot more openness and transparency from that police director.
Okay.
It's still a political office. And if we don't remember that, then we won't be able to respond accordingly. So we have seen a little bit more cooperation, a little bit more openness towards the end of a mayoral term, I'll just be frank. And then we do when we think they think their career might be a little bit longer. I think our current police chief has gone a little bit back and forth on that, and you can feel the political uncertainty there. But you have to take that into account. This is still a political office. It's still a political atmosphere that they're operating in.
Particularly, you want to mention something?
Well, I just want to answer the question. From our perspective, the answer is no. MPD are not trying to bridge the gap and to build trust within the community. We have been approached by clergy and individuals in the community about holding an event with MPD. However, we did not accept that because that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to hold them accountable. Their responsibility is to rebuild trust in the community. We are willing to work with them to do that if we see that they are authentic in the process and the progress they're trying to make.
Okay, thank you. And let me mention, I mentioned some changes within policies and ordinances that have taken place within the past 5 to 10 days. We take hopefully 1 or 2 steps forward with the passing of the Achieving Driving Equality Act and ordinance, and then we seem to take 4 or 5 steps backwards. And I mentioned specifically the Memphis Police Department and the City of Memphis's plan to enforce the child curfew downtown with a wider program and expanding that pilot program to include other areas, I presume, down the line. Let me get each one of your thoughts about that, because this is somewhat hot off the presses, and tell me about your concerns that you may have. I know they're numerous, but also what are some of the micro issues that you have with it right now as well as long term in terms of how we rebuild trust and actually. Go ahead.
One, to answer your other question, I don't organize with police, so that was never an option. 2, like I said before, the police have to uphold the system of white supremacy, and so when that looks like us pushing them to be more transparent, removing their access to citizens, they're gonna look for other ways, and that looks like what they're doing with this juvenile abatement program. Although I will say that they have released a statement saying they're not doing their program anymore, and Paul Young from the Downtown Commission said he was gonna meet with them. I called him and asked him to include juveniles who are actually just as impacted in that conversation, because what we also see is that, you know, folks when they're running for mayor or, you know, are in charge of other positions like to come and put out cute statements and press releases and articles in the commercial appeal, but they don't actually do anything. And so I do think it's important to also hold those folks, although it's not a political office, as like Yana was talking about, it is an office that's important for the downtown area. He does have some power. So making sure that you're not only engaging youth, but including them in the conversation and listening to what they're saying. Because we have a youth juvenile consortium here that has been putting out action steps of what they want to see in our community for several years. No one has listened to them. And so before you go and over-police the youth, actually listen to what they have to say. They've been asking for programs for several years now. We refuse to give them to them because we would rather over-criminalize them. And so I think it just also shows what Pastor Earl was talking about is this systemic approach of we're never going to allow folks to live happy, free Black lives. We're always going to do whatever we can to reduce them to criminals as much as possible and put them further into poverty. And that looks like creating new programs, like, you know, stop and frisk and reinforcing vagrancy laws because you're dressed inappropriately or you're playing loud music, which also is not illegal. None of these things they mentioned that they were going to target the minors for was actually illegal. So it's just a way to put them into the criminal justice system because they said it would take them to juvenile court. If their parents don't pick them up, then they're going to the juvenile detention center. So there's another way to put more money in their pockets and put those youth in the system as early as possible.
Thank you. Amber, I know Amber has to leave, so she's not going to walk out on anyone's answer in a matter of protest. She does have to leave at 10:30, so don't be offended anyone on the panel.
But let me speak next. She walk out when
Yeah,
I'm
I
preaching from
appreciate
time to time.
Well,
So I'm just like, she doesn't.
But she
She
gets her
might walk
time
in
first.
in the middle of the sermon, but she doesn't get up and walk out like in the middle. Or at least she hadn't up to this one.
No, I have to go actually radicalize some youth from the Christian Foundation. I have to organize it. That's why I have to leave.
Very good.
But
Well
I
said.
really appreciate the opportunity to speak with y'all.
Thank you, Amber. Appreciate you being here.
So there's a lot on the table. I want to try to respond to in a reasonable amount of time. Let me start with, Amber said that she doesn't organize with police. I don't either, but I'm definitely willing to dialogue with anybody about the merits of any issue. And I have been open to being moved off of points that I'm committed to if you can provide me with substantive data and information to persuade me. And I think that's basically known about me out in the community. And I can say my personal experience has been, I have literally been avoided by some of the top brass. And when I have been snuck into some of those rooms and had direct conversation with them, they will acknowledge the merits of the points that have been made and then go out in the community and do the exact same thing as if we did not have a conversation. And this is almost, to Reverend Ayana's point, irrespective of where they are in their political office or process. They might nod and say, you know, Dr. Fisher has a point, or, you know, I really like that guy. Even if they, you know, somebody said that even though I was under surveillance. You know, they had me under surveillance but said he's a pretty good guy. So I don't have that confidence in the benevolence of the system to engage honestly, openly on the merits. I just don't. To the point about the abatement policy. The mayor put out a statement trying to justify the policy and said, in part, it's because 8 to 10-year-olds are all over downtown unaccompanied. Now, there are enough of you in here to do your basic research. Go and figure out if he can validate that statement. And to note that there are official documents that are coming out of city offices, county offices, state offices, grounded in hyperbole or innuendo or anecdotal whatever. It is part of the most baffling part of anybody who is advocating and organizing, trying to make a system more just. Because if it's not connected to truth, it can't be just. So I don't have the same confidence in, just the benevolence of the system as it stands. And I think most of the people who are elected to office and appointed to office are not committed to the same level of truth and justice that I and others are. As such, there's not much accountability. This is why people can leave emails unchecked or unaddressed for over 2 years. It's because they're not committed to truth and justice. And they have been appointed and employed by people who have been elected, but they are not committed to truth and justice. So the question ultimately becomes, if somebody does not respond, who are they accountable to? And until we leverage those pressure points, I don't know if we'll accomplish in any reasonable amount of time the things that at least some of us say we're aspiring to. Because it goes back to the philosophy. Certain people are after power regardless of how it is obtained or maintained. And that is something that has to be concretely and substantially discussed and followed up on, such that whoever makes promises or claims in public can be held accountable for the promises and the claims that they make.
Mark, have you seen any evidence that 8 to 10-year-olds have been languishing downtown in your research?
I haven't, but that's not an area that I've paid any attention to.
I was looking for some verification where officials said, we have to find some stats.
A common sense observation.
Okay.
8 and 10-year-olds are not contributing in a significant way to a crime problem or a nuisance.
That would make sense. So let me read the official statement, and then I'm going to get Tequila and Reverend Watkins' response. This is from the City of Memphis Mayor, Mayor James Strickland, about this juvenile abatement program. The official, in part, statement reads, "We will begin enforcing curfew downtown as a pilot." You're in downtown right now, downtown Memphis. Strickland said in the statement. "In recent years, we have not been able to enforce that law because Shelby County Juvenile Court and county facilities will not take the juveniles detained for violations. Once we begin the pilot, we will take juveniles to city-owned facility, call their parents, wait for them to pick up their child, and cite them to juvenile court in the form of a juvenile summons." Your thoughts, Tequila? How do we take apparently reasonable steps forward in the wake of that driving equality ordinance, but then focus our targets on enforcement of laws against young people in the downtown area?
So I believe the person with the loudest mic and the biggest platform can shape the narrative. They've created a narrative that our youth are the problem. Now they've created a program to try to make that narrative a reality. As a former educator, the injustices that are taking place as it relates to our youth is unacceptable. We are targeting the youth in our educational system as well as the criminal justice system because we as adults have dropped the ball somewhere. And it's up to us to now shift the direction of where we want to see these things go in our city and who we want to be as a community, because over-policing our youth is not acceptable, and it's not enough people actually outraged about what's been put out. They paused this program because this information was leaked, but they're going to rebrand it and then represent it. And just because they press pause does not mean that the mindsets of the officers that are to uphold this has changed as well. we have to do better as a community to show up and hold those people accountable for what they're trying to do to our youth in our community, because it's unacceptable.
Thank you, Tequila. Reverend Watkins, I want to add a little bit of a tidbit from statistical information, and you can answer that same question. And I think District Attorney Moore has indicated this, that there statistically have been increases from a pure statistic basis in younger people aged 16 to 18 committing property offenses, and maybe an increase in crimes that are deemed violent by nature, carjacking, things of that sort. Does this type of policy, in your opinion, based upon what you've seen in the work that you've been doing, address the issues that many people across the city have with being concerned about some of the things that young people are taking a part of? Does this effectively achieve a potential reduction in those types of offenses from what you've seen and what you know?
The simple answer is no. The more complex answer has some more questions in it for me. One, I think we have placed a lot of blame, for example, on young people as a whole. You know, we started out talking about 8 to 10-year-olds, and now you're talking about 16 to 18-year-olds. These are the same 16 to 18-year-olds we're trying with all our might to try as adults. So are they adults or are they children? If they're adults, stop looping them in with the other children. And let those children have their fun, have their life, live and live as free and black and happy as we can possibly allow. But also, I feel like we've placed the blame on young people when there's several things wrong with that problem. One is brain development. They don't have the brain development to make good decisions that consider 5 years into the future until they're in their 20s. But we keep holding them accountable for things as though they are adults. Second, I find it amazing that we're holding teenagers accountable for car thefts and not Hyundai, Kia, and Infiniti for correcting their internal systems that make it possible for a child to download an app and break into a car. I have a 6-year-old at home. If I place a jar of confetti in front of her and ask her not to touch it, she is going to lose her mind for 15 seconds, and then she's going to throw it up in the air and say, F it, I'm taking the consequences. That's what children do. We've handed them phones. The phones have the apps on them for free, and then they can say, I'm gonna go now and take any reasonable child's brain is gonna take that opportunity. And yes, we have not held, as Amber pointed out, the business community accountable for making sure that we can take these fails out of these systems. We've decided to hold children accountable and damage their futures and their possibility of even taking a different path once their brains come together. That's the part that infuriates me and gives me the fuel to keep doing this work. Because the young people that I come into contact with are exactly the ones that you've heard referenced here. The young people of the Youth Justice Action Council, who are working to create a justice system and put pieces in place that allow them to have a future and a hope. I work with the Shelby County Youth Council, with our own Micah Youth Council. These are young people who are like, we are people, and we deserve to have a future. And you have a lot of nerve coming for us when you are burning the earth down with climate change. You know, so these are the things that we hear from them. They want to be able to have the potential and the opportunity to live their best life. And they don't have the alternatives that they need to even, why is a child going to Beale Street in the first place? Why aren't there other youth appropriate places for young people to hang out after school? For them to play sports, for them to do what they want to do. We take away art, recess in school, and then we're like, why don't these children burn enough energy? We take away music. Why don't these children have someplace to be? These are things that we're doing on the top end of the system and then looking at them and blaming them once it comes out the end of the funnel.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my phrase is, when you walk around with a hammer of mass incarceration, everything looks like a nail of black criminality. And so I share Reverend Ion's passion, absolutely. And to add to that, if you have a media that literally loops the story over and over again, here's how you steal the car. I mean,
Mark doesn't, he doesn't do it.
no, but maybe some of the, he knows people who doesn't, let me say it that way.
we're going to excuse him from the panel.
Yeah, right. He hadn't written about it, thanks be unto God. Right? But definitely, I mean, it's just like out there, like you watch it on the news. But the other piece about the accountability is, well, twofold. Number one, let's not concede the point that the majority of our children are out here doing this. Should we run the numbers again? Right? So and as Amber said, if you are down on Beale Street, is that illegal? No, it's not illegal. So is this the answer? I mean, this goes back to the premise of your original question. Is this the answer? That's why the short answer is no. But also, to Reverend Ayala's point, let's get into the why. Why is this happening? These are the questions, the contextual questions that we don't tend to wrestle with deep enough. Maybe some of those who are engaged in these behaviors are doing it because it's easier to get access to guns and drugs in your neighborhood than it is to get access to an equitable education or a job that pays a livable wage in your community. Maybe it's because a state law said open carry and then lowered it to age 18, and now people feel like they need guns in their community to be safe. So maybe they're breaking into the cars to get guns based upon their perception of safety as their brains are undeveloped. But these are not the conversations that we hear generally in the public. And so then what does accountability look like? It has to look like people who pass the laws, as well as people who enforce the laws, as well as people who adjudicate and argue the laws. And I think there's been not enough pounding of the facts and not enough pounding of the law, but a whole lot of pounding of the table.
We've got a few more minutes, actually 1 or 2 minutes, and I want to end with this question before we open it up to questions from our audience. Ask you to put on your fortune hat, Miss Cleo style, and answer this question. 5 years from now, and I'll start with you, Reverend Marcus. 5 years from now, or even sooner than that, how will police accountability look for the city of Memphis, based upon these changes, the conversations that are taking place about ordinances, the things that we've talked about today? How does that look?
You're gonna let me dream, right?
Dream, go ahead, dream.
In 5 years, I want to see leadership in the police department that is looking with the community at true public safety, that has decided to even change its name, because everybody, in quotes, wants police, but nobody wants to be policed. But if their mission is to protect and to serve, then one must assume that there is someone to be protected from. And there are so many of us with black and brown skin who've realized, oh, we're on that side of that sentence. And so until we can get somebody in who said, I'm over that and I'm ready to change this culture, that's what I'm looking for in 5 years, is to see that movement. I also want to see in 5 years that open carry and permitless carry has been repealed. In 5 years, Kia, Infiniti, and Hyundai have fixed their cars. In 5 years, we have seen the 3rd grade retention law repealed and torn back so that our children are not being held back in 3rd grade unnecessarily, and our jails are not being filled off of those numbers. So in 5 years, those are things I can actually see, an engaged citizenry that we are building right now, making possible for all of us.
Thank you, Reverend Marcus. Steven?
5 years from now, we would like to see the abolishment of specialized units in the MPD. We would like to see the community as well as law enforcement working together to ensure we have a just and safe community. We hope that MPD will be a small, robust system in a big ecosystem that we all exist in, and we have adequately placed funding in the right spaces to ensure that we know who to call if something is happening in our home that does not require a police, but we can get some type of help. So in 5 years, we just hope to see a shift in the mindset of individuals as safety is reimagined as well as implemented in our city.
Thank you. Mark, from a journalistic perspective, 5 years from now, how will some of the research that you did in the months after, the days and the weeks and months after Mr. Nichols' death, how's that going to change based upon the work that you did and the things that you found out, but also the important work that these individuals on this stage and in the audience are doing?
Well, I hope our work has a positive impact. We do see progress. From a journalist standpoint, probably my greatest concern is for transparency, that we absolutely have to have, if we're gonna have accountability, we have to have access to information and records and whatnot. And just FYI, I have, in the last 2 years, filed, I think it's 3 and maybe going on 4 public access lawsuits. In Tennessee, if the government refuses to hand over public records, your recourse is to sue them in Chancery Court. And I've done that with the help of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, because I don't have a dime to do this, but they do it pro bono. It's a great organization. They've got really good lawyers, and there's an attorney in Nashville named Paul McAdoo, who's, I'm a regular customer of his because of what's going on here. But I think we're just gonna have to keep fighting this fight, the fight for transparency and access to information. We're taking up another lawsuit because there's some more information that they're withholding, but I filed for access to body camera footage and for a meeting in the jail and for police, what they call performance enhancement plans for officers who are they're trying to steer on the correct course. But this is a long-standing pattern of being denied information, public information. It's the public, it's all your information, and this is our job is to try to turn this loose. So I'm going to be very curious to see how that plays out over the next few years, and I think a lot of this will be riding on the coming election. We have a mayoral election this year, and there'll be a change in leadership, and we'll see whether we get more openness.
Thank you. Reverend Fisher, wrap it up for us. 5 years from now. I know that seems like somewhat of a long time.
No, it seems like a short time. You probably should have came to me first.
Okay.
I hate to sound like the pessimistic prophet. I don't think much will change in the next 5 years. Maybe 10, maybe 15. It won't be because of a lack of effort and initiatives by people at the front of movement work. It won't be for lack of trying. But these systems and structures have been in place for a mighty long time. And people a lot more ferocious and courageous and creative and compassionate than many of us have sought to take them on. And it took them a longer time to get the semblance of justice and change and accountability and truth that many of us long for. So I'm not saying that it won't happen. I am saying I don't have any illusion that it will happen quickly. Again, day by day, we are recoiling back to a status quo. And God forbid, another flashpoint or high-profile case or national attention on the city because of some tragedy or heinous occurrence causes some other shift. But I just can't say in good faith that looking at the trajectory of where we are, where we're trying to be, 5 years gives us enough time to calculate anything. Yes, there is a mayoral race coming up, and you might change personnel, but looking at the landscape, you're not changing the philosophy. We'll push to try to make sure whoever ends up in those positions are more progressive. But y'all pray for us because we'll definitely be swimming upstream. So you should have came to me first, brother. That's all I can say.
Well, on that downward note, let's go ahead. No, I'm joking. On that note, let me go ahead and open it up to the audience for any questions. We've got about probably 9 minutes or so for questions of our panel. Anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am. You can stand.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for this wonderful panel and the discussion. I wanted to follow up on one of the data points in terms of Black women being 5 times more likely to be stopped as opposed to Black men, which are 4 times more likely to be stopped. I find that number very interesting. And is there another component that we should be aware of in terms of are there like assaults of Black women that are happening that are not being reported? Because normally you would see the reverse. So I was curious as to why Black women seem to be targeted more in Memphis, and if there's something deeper that we should be aware of.
I can't remember if you mentioned it was Amber. I think she's gone. Now she is gone.
I think it was Black women are 5 times more likely to be stopped than
Yeah, I think it was one or two.
4 times more likely to stop than white men. I think it's still the case that black men in general are more likely to.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So I was, first of all, the panel was fantastic, I really enjoyed it. But I was curious from afar, when the Nichols case first came up, the thing that we noticed is that most, if not all of the officers were people of color. And is there any significance in that in Memphis? Was it surprising? That may make the issue of policing even clearer. But I'm just curious of what the reaction is from the panel.
Yeah, hear from the panel.
Yeah. No, and these are comments that I made on national media, echoing commentary by, folks like one of our fraternity brothers, Rayshard Ray at the Brookings Institute, folks like Ben Crump even said it. The studies show when it comes to policing, the race of the officer is not the determining factor. It's the race of the citizen that's being engaged by law enforcement. What I said is if 2 is company and 3 is a crowd, 5 or more are a system and a structure. And if you journey back a couple of years at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, which we still may be in the height depending upon who's doing the analysis, but definitely around 2016, when people were saying Black Lives Matter and the response was all lives matter, and then the next trope became blue lives matter. And I used to say, well, what is a blue light? A smirk? but what was being articulated was it did not matter the race or the ethnicity of the officer. When they put their uniform on, they became something other than their initial ethnicity. No, we were not surprised by that. We are witnessing what happens when people of all ethnicities are contaminated by a culture of police aggression and brutality. So no, we're not surprised.
And I would say, I would venture to say, I don't have any statistical information, but maybe you do to back this up. I would say the majority of Memphis Police Department is African American. So, yeah, so it stands to reason that the encounters with the city that predominantly African American, you're going to have that encounter. But to your point, Reverend Fisher, it's a mindset issue. And so I do somewhat share your pessimistic outlook on everything. How long does it take to change a policy versus a mindset and a culture? That's 2 totally different things. Anyone else want to chime in on that question about being surprised about the racial component from the panel? Reverend?
Not surprised, I think just added sadness and grief to the anger. But to the point, Blue Lives Matter, the blue code, it's almost like it's like an intentional overriding of the color of skin. And the 5 is a system, and we've said black skin doesn't say black lives. It hasn't and it won't. And if we go back to Professor Frank's analysis, black overseers were used in slavery, and that pattern has continued through the decades and centuries. And so those pieces, they're all in line. It's too aligned to surprise us.
I want to say, surprised I was, and I was very sad that people like me could do something to someone else that looks like me. I've heard it said that white supremacy does not require white people to uphold white supremacy, and that is what we see happening because people have conformed to the culture and climate within these systems as opposed to standing up and disrupting the status quo. And if we continue to move along in that direction, from the criminal justice system to our educational system, this ship don't sink, and we all wrong.
We got time for about maybe 2 more questions, depending upon time. Yes, ma'am. Esteemed attorneys, for me to turn.
For Reverend Fisher or whoever else wants to answer, so in the Tyre Nichols case, we saw a very swift, there was very swift action. They were charged very quickly. This was something that we hadn't seen before. So is this an anomaly? Is this an indication of change that's going to happen going forward? Can you speak to that?
I do think it's a new standard being set, and to the brother's question earlier, what I would have said, the shock probably would have been for most people, the rather swift response from the city and the district attorney's office. But although it may have looked swift on the surface, it's kind of like when you see an iceberg. What you don't know is how deep it is underneath. The response was a byproduct of fierce activism and organizing on the ground for the last several years. It was not just the heinous and egregious video, but it was also the fact that there was a different district attorney. Because I can say confidently, even the current district attorney may disagree, but I can say confidently, if the previous district attorney was still in office, I'm not confident that any of the officers would have been arrested. She had a 100% non-indictment rate. So, I think anytime you try to isolate it with one particular department or the other, it might read a certain way, and nationally it read a certain way. And the initial commentary was about the benevolence, and everybody moves so well, and it was so smart. I was like, no. If you look at how aggressive the activism had been, and how the issues had been before so many of the people, I don't think anybody had the luxury of trying to sweep this under the rug. And again, I just think the methodology of the current district attorney, I'm talking about him like he's not in here, but District Attorney Roy was very proactive in engaging with community members about what, just for advice. Of course, ultimately his decisions, but I think was very open insofar as the dialogue was concerned, and sincerely took to heart some of the recommendations that were made by community members. So I think that was different. But I also think none of us can say confidently if it was 5 white officers that we would have saw the same response. And I say this even with my dear brother in the room.
Any other questions for our panel? All right, well, on that note, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for your attention.